The last thing my father said to me was, "Don't work too hard, son." I remember smiling, looking at my phone, half listening while answering emails. "I won't, Dad. I'll call you this weekend." He laughed softly. "You always say that." Then he added, "I love you. Love you too." And I hung up. I didn't know. That would be the last time I ever hear his voice. 3 days later, my phone rang at 6:14 inches the morning. Nobody calls that early with good news. The screen showed an unfamiliar number. For a moment, I almost ignored it. Then I answered, "Hello." A woman's voice spoke softly. "Is this Jason Miller?" "Yes. My name is Rebecca. I'm calling from St. Mary's Hospital." The moment I heard the word hospital, my stomach dropped. "I'm sorry," she continued. "Your father suffered a heart attack last night." I couldn't breathe. "Is he okay?" There was silence. Then the words every child fears hearing. "We did everything we could." "I'm so sorry." The world stopped. The room disappeared. The sounds around me faded away. I heard Rebecca speaking, but her voice sounded far away, like it was underwater. All I could think was, "No, not Dad, not yet." I had always believed there would be more time, more holidays, more phone calls, more visits, more chances to sit on the porch and hear his stories. But suddenly, time was gone. The funeral took place 4 days later. Friends, neighbors, old coworkers, people I barely recognized, they all came, one after another. They told stories about my father, how he helped repair a widow's roof for free, how he drove an elderly neighbor to doctor appointments, how he never missed a community fundraiser. Everyone seemed to know a version of him that I had never really taken the time to understand. After the service, an elderly man approached me. His hands trembled with age, but his eyes were kind. "Your father talked about you all the time," he said. I smiled politely. "He did?" The man nodded. "Every chance he got." Then he said something that stayed with me. "He was proud of you, prouder than anyone I've ever met." I thanked him, but inside, I felt something else. Guilt. Because while Dad spent years talking about me, I had spent years being too busy to visit him, too busy to call, too busy to notice he was getting older. The following week, I drove back to Dad's house, the small white farmhouse where I grew up, the place he had lived alone ever since Mom passed away. The lawn needed mowing. The paint was peeling. The porch swing creaked in the wind. Everything looked smaller than I remembered. Older, too. When I unlocked the front door, the smell hit me immediately. Coffee, old books, wood polish. It smelled exactly like my childhood. For a moment, I expected Dad to walk out of the kitchen, smile, and ask if I was hungry. Instead, the house was silent. I spent the afternoon sorting through his belongings. Clothes, photographs, receipts, old tools. Nothing unusual, nothing unexpected. Just the ordinary pieces of a man's life. Then, near sunset, I entered the garage. At the very back, behind an old workbench, sat a small metal box, covered in dust, locked with a rusted padlock. On top was a yellow envelope, and written in my father's handwriting were 6 words that made my heart race. "For Jason, after I'm gone." I stared at the envelope, suddenly afraid to open it, because deep down, I knew whatever was inside that box was about to change everything I thought I knew about my father. I carried the metal box into the living room. It was heavier than it looked. The paint was scratched. The corners were rusted. Dad had obviously owned it for decades. I searched every drawer for a key. Nothing. Then I remembered something. When I was little, Dad always kept a spare key inside an old coffee tin above the refrigerator. I smiled. Please still be there. I climbed onto a chair, reached into the dusty tin, and there it was, a tiny brass key, exactly where he'd left it. My hands trembled as I unlocked the box. The lid opened with a soft creak. Inside, everything was perfectly organized. Bundles of old receipts, bank statements, several envelopes tied together with faded blue ribbon, a worn leather notebook, and dozens of photographs. On top lay a single folded letter. Across the front, Dad had written, "Read this last." I wanted to open it immediately, but something told me to follow his instructions. So instead, I picked up the notebook. The first page read, "For Jason's future." Below it, Dad had written dates, expenses, and short notes beside each one. September 1998. Jason's school uniform, $146, worth every penny. The next page, March 2001. Bought his first computer. Worked every Saturday for 4 months. I frowned. Dad had told me the computer was on sale. It wasn't. He had worked extra shifts to afford it. Page after page. The same pattern appeared. Every sacrifice, every extra hour, every dollar, carefully recorded. Not because Dad expected repayment, but because writing things down had always helped him remember. Then I noticed a small envelope tucked between the pages. Inside was a faded receipt. Across the top, it read, "Vehicle sold." My heart skipped. The date looked familiar. That was the same summer. Dad had suddenly stopped driving his favorite pickup truck. Back then, I asked him what happened. He simply smiled. I figured it was time for something smaller. I believed him. Now, the receipt told a different story. The truck hadn't broken down. It hadn't been replaced. He had sold it. Folded behind the receipt was another piece of paper. A handwritten note. Only one sentence. "Jason's first semester is paid in full." I stared at those words. The timing was impossible to ignore. Dad sold the truck. The week my college tuition was due, I slowly leaned back in my chair. The truck wasn't just a vehicle. It was his dream. He had spent years restoring it. Every weekend. He polished it until it shined. People offered to buy it dozens of times. He always refused. Until he needed money for me. Suddenly, my childhood looked different. Every memory, every explanation, every excuse Dad had ever given me had been protecting me from the truth. He never wanted me to know what anything had cost. As evening fell, I continued sorting through the box. Near the bottom, I found a thick stack of pawn shop receipts, one after another, each with Dad's signature. A wedding ring, an old watch, a set of antique tools Grandpa had left him. I couldn't understand. Why would he pawn family treasures? Then, one final receipt slipped onto the floor. Attached to it was a note written in Dad's handwriting. "Education is never an expense. It's an investment in the person you love." Tears filled my eyes. I had always believed my success came from my own hard work. Now I was beginning to understand. Someone else had been paying a price, long before I ever did, and hidden beneath the last bundle of papers was a photograph that would reveal the greatest sacrifice my father had ever made. The photograph was old. Its edges were worn. The colors had faded with time. At first, it looked ordinary. Dad stood beside an old piece of land, smiling. A sold sign was planted behind him. I frowned. I didn't remember Dad ever selling land. Then I turned the photo over. On the back, in his careful handwriting, he had written, "Your grandfather's land. Sold so Jason could finish college." I stopped breathing. Grandpa's land? No, that couldn't be right. When I was a boy, Dad used to take me there every summer. 20 acres of rolling fields, an old oak tree, a small fishing pond. Dad always told me, "One day, this land will stay in our family." I believed him, but it hadn't. He gave it up. For me, I searched deeper into the box. Another envelope, another receipt. This time, it was from a local real estate office. The amount written across the page matched almost exactly 4 years of my university tuition. Dad hadn't borrowed money. He hadn't won the lottery. He had sold the only land Grandpa left him, the land that had belonged to our family for generations. My hands shook. I whispered to the empty house, "Why didn't you tell me?" Only silence answered. Suddenly, a memory came rushing back. It was my second year of college. I had called Dad. "Dad, I need another semester. I'm thinking about changing my major." There was a long pause. Then he laughed. "If that's what you need, we'll figure it out." I never wondered how. Now I knew. That phone call had cost him far more than money. It had cost him his family's legacy. I sat on the old living room floor for what felt like hours. The photograph rested in my hands. Everything Dad had ever said suddenly made sense. Whenever I apologized for the cost of school, he always answered the same way. Education is something nobody can ever take away from you. Back then, I thought it was just a saying. Now, I realized it had been the principle he built his entire life around. As the sun began to set, I noticed another small envelope tucked beneath the photograph. Inside was a newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local factory worker sells family farm." There was a picture of Dad, standing in front of the same field, smiling politely for the camera. I had never seen the article before, probably because he never wanted me to. Folded inside the clipping was one short note. Jason graduated today. I'd sell it all again without hesitation. The tears came instantly. Dad had never regretted his decision, not for 1 second. That night, I couldn't bring myself to leave the house. I sat in Dad's old recliner, holding the photograph, looking around the quiet living room. For the first time, I wasn't mourning the father I had lost. I was mourning the father I had never truly understood. And hidden beneath the final stack of papers was a bundle of handwritten letters. Each one began with the same words, "Dear Jason." I had no idea. Those letters would reveal the life my father had hidden from me, so I could live a better one. I carefully untied the faded blue ribbon. Inside were dozens of handwritten letters. Every one of them began the same way, "Dear Jason," but none of them had stamps. None had been mailed. Dad had written them only for himself, or perhaps for a day he knew he would never see. I opened the first one. It was dated the week after I moved away to college. "Dear Jason, the house feels much quieter now. Your room's still exactly the way you left it. Your mother keeps walking past your door. Sometimes she smiles. Sometimes she cries. She says she's proud of you. So am I. I just wish I could tell you without sounding emotional. Love, Dad." I wiped my eyes. Mom had passed away years ago. I never knew she used to stand outside my bedroom. Dad had never mentioned it. The next letter was written 3 years later, the year I got my first job. "Dear Jason, today you called and told me you got promoted. I've never heard your voice sound so excited." After we hung up, I sat on the porch for almost an hour. Not because I was lonely, because I was thankful. Everything your mother and I hoped for is finally happening. There wasn't a single complaint, not one word about the sacrifices, only pride. Another letter. This one stopped me cold. "Dear Jason, you said you're too busy to come home for Christmas. I understand. Work is important. Don't worry about me. I'll save your favorite seat anyway, just in case." I covered my face. That Christmas, I had stayed in the city because I wanted to impress my boss. I promised Dad I'll make it up next year. I never did. There were more letters. Birthdays, Thanksgivings, Father's Days, every holiday I had missed. Dad never wrote about disappointment. Only hope. Maybe next year. I'm sure he's doing his best. Tell him I'm proud of him if he calls. Every page broke my heart a little more. Then I found a letter that had never been finished. The pen had stopped halfway through the sentence. "Dear Jason, today the doctor told me." The rest of the page was blank. No signature, no ending, only unfinished words. I stared at it for a long time. That must have been the day Dad learned his heart was failing. He wanted to tell me, but he couldn't bring himself to become another burden in my busy life. Instead, he carried that fear alone. I gently placed the unfinished letter back into the envelope. For the first time in years, I cried without trying to stop myself, not because Dad had died, but because he had loved me so completely that even his loneliness, he tried to protect me from. As I gathered the letters together, one final envelope slipped onto the floor. Unlike the others, it wasn't addressed to me. Across the front, Dad had written only 3 words. "For my granddaughter." My heart skipped. Emma had adored her grandfather, but she was only 8 years old when he passed. What could he possibly have wanted to tell her? I slowly reached for the envelope, knowing that whatever was inside would become the greatest gift my daughter would ever receive. I held the envelope carefully. Across the front, Dad had written, "For Emma, my daughter." She was only 8 years old, too young to understand why Grandpa wasn't coming back, too young to understand why adults sometimes cried when they smiled. I slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. The paper smelled faintly of cedar wood, as if Dad had written it years before. My dear Emma, if you're reading this, it means Grandpa isn't sitting beside you anymore. That makes me sad, but I hope it doesn't make you afraid. Growing old is part of living, and loving someone means accepting that one day we have to say goodbye. I paused, already struggling to continue. Dad's handwriting was steady, calm, almost comforting. The next page read, "Always be kind to your parents. One day, they'll grow slower. Their hands will shake. Their steps will become smaller. Please don't rush them, because once, they walked slowly, just so you could learn to walk." My eyes filled with tears. I could almost hear Dad saying those words. Another page. "Listen to their stories, even if you've heard them before. One day, you'll wish you could hear them, just one more time." Then, the final paragraph, the one that completely broke me. "If your daddy ever seems tired, give him a hug. He works very hard because he loves you." Sometimes grown-ups forget to slow down. When that happens, please remind him, family is always more important than work. Love, Grandpa. I lowered the letter, unable to speak. Dad wasn't just writing to Emma, he was still teaching me, even after he was gone. That evening, Emma came into my office. "Daddy?" I smiled. "Come here." She climbed onto my lap. "I found something Grandpa wrote for you." She looked at me with wide eyes. "For me?" I nodded. Together, we read every word. Halfway through, she quietly reached for my hand. When we finished, she hugged me tightly. "I miss Grandpa." "I do too," I whispered. Then she looked up at me. "Daddy, when you're old, I'm going to take care of you." The tears came instantly. I couldn't answer. I simply held her, praying she'd always remember that promise. Later that night, I walked into Dad's bedroom. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. His reading glasses rested on the nightstand. His favorite sweater still hung behind the door. On the bookshelf, I noticed an old photo album I'd somehow overlooked. Curious, I opened it. Inside were hundreds of photographs, not of vacations, not of birthdays, not of holidays. Almost every picture was of me, learning to ride a bike, playing baseball, graduating, getting married, holding Emma for the first time. Dad was barely in any of them. He had spent his whole life behind the camera, making sure everyone else's memories were captured, while quietly disappearing from them himself. And tucked inside the very last page was one final photograph, a picture I had never seen before. The image would reveal the one dream my father gave up forever, so mine could come true. I picked up the final photograph. At first, it didn't seem important. Dad stood beside a large building. He looked younger, maybe 30 years old. He was smiling, wearing a brand new work uniform. Behind him, a sign read, "Midwest Aviation Training Center." I frowned. Dad had never worked in aviation. He spent his entire life at the local factory. Why was he standing there? Tucked behind the photograph was another folded letter. This one was much older than the others. The paper had become thin with age. Across the top, Dad had written only one sentence: "The dream I never told anyone about." My heart began to race. I unfolded the letter. "Dear Jason, when I was 23, I wanted to become a pilot. I had already been accepted into flight school. I still remember the day the acceptance letter arrived. I thought my whole life was about to begin. Then, a few weeks later, I found out your mother was pregnant with you. Everything changed." I stopped reading. "Dad wanted to be a pilot?" I had never heard him mention it. "Not once." I continued. "People often ask if I regret giving up that dream. The answer is simple: no. Because dreams don't disappear. Sometimes, they simply change. The day you were born, you became my new dream. Watching you grow, watching you succeed, watching you become a better man than I ever was. That became the life I wanted." The tears blurred the words. All these years, I thought Dad had settled for an ordinary life. Now I realized it had been an extraordinary sacrifice. Not because someone forced him, because he chose it. For me, I remembered something from childhood. Whenever an airplane flew overhead, Dad always stopped what he was doing. He looked up, smiled, and watched until it disappeared into the clouds. I used to ask, "Do you like airplanes?" He would grin. They remind me that anything is possible. I thought he was talking about me. Maybe. He always was. That evening, I drove to the small airport outside town, the one Dad used to take me to as a little boy. We would sit on a wooden bench for hours, watching planes take off. He always looked happier there. Back then, I never understood why. Now, everything made sense. An elderly airport employee noticed me standing by the fence. "You must be Robert's son." I looked surprised. "You knew my father?" The man smiled. Everyone here knew him. He came almost every month. For nearly 30 years. I couldn't believe it. He never told me. The man nodded. "He'd sit right over there." He pointed toward the old bench. "And every time a plane took off, he smiled." Then the man said something I'll never forget. "Your father once told me, I may never fly one, but my son will go farther than I ever could." I sat on the same bench Dad had used for decades, watching the sunset, watching airplanes disappear into the distance. For the first time, I understood what true love looked like. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Sometimes, it was giving up your own dream, so someone else could chase theirs. As I prepared to leave, the airport employee hurried after me. "Wait, your father asked me to give you this." But only after he was gone. He handed me a small sealed envelope. Across the front, Dad had written, "Open this when you finally understand." I stared at those words. Deep down, I knew I was finally beginning to understand. But what waited inside that envelope would become the greatest lesson my father would ever teach me. I sat in my car for several minutes. The envelope rested quietly in my hands. Across the front, Dad had written, "Open this when you finally understand." For the first time in my life, I believed I did. I slowly broke the seal. Inside, there was only one sheet of paper. No long letter, no dramatic goodbye, just a few paragraphs, written with the same careful handwriting I had known since childhood. "Dear Jason, if you're reading this, then you finally discovered the things I tried so hard to hide. Not because I wanted to keep secrets, but because love isn't something that should make another person feel guilty. Real love gives freely, without expecting anything in return." I paused. Those words felt heavier than anything I'd ever read. Dad had spent his entire life giving, and somehow, he never wanted credit for it. I continued reading. "Please don't spend your life regretting what you didn't know. Regret steals today's happiness to pay for yesterday's mistakes. Instead, take everything you've learned and become the father your own daughter deserves. That will be more than enough for me." I wiped away another tear. Dad wasn't asking me to carry guilt. He was asking me to carry love forward. At the bottom of the page, there was one final request. "Promise me 3 things. Call your family often. Never let work become more important than the people waiting at home. And when your daughter needs you, be there, even if it costs you something. Especially if it costs you something, because that's what fathers do." I folded the letter carefully, not because it was fragile, but because it had become the most valuable thing I owned. On the drive home, I kept thinking about my own life. The promotions, the overtime, the weekends I'd sacrificed, the birthdays I'd almost missed. I had always believed I was providing for my family, but suddenly, I wondered if I had also been missing them. That evening, Emma ran to the front door the moment I arrived. "Daddy, can you play with me?" Normally, I would have smiled and said, "Give me 10 minutes." 10 minutes usually became an hour. An hour became bedtime. This time, I set my briefcase on the floor, turned off my phone, and smiled. "Let's play." Her face lit up. For the next 2 hours, we built a cardboard castle in the living room. We laughed until our stomachs hurt. Sarah stood quietly in the doorway, watching us. Later that night, she whispered, "You've changed." I smiled. I think Dad finally taught me the lesson he'd been trying to teach my whole life. A few weeks later, my company offered me another promotion. It came with more money, a bigger office, and one condition: I'd have to travel nearly every week. A year earlier, I would have accepted without hesitation. Now, I looked at the contract, then at the photograph of Emma on my desk. I quietly pushed the papers back. "I'm honored, but I'm going to pass." My manager looked shocked. "Are you sure?" I smiled. "Absolutely. I've already missed enough." That evening, as I drove home, for the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about the career I might lose. I was thinking about the memories I was finally going to make. I had no idea that waiting for me at home was one final surprise my father had arranged before he passed away. A surprise that would leave my entire family in tears. When I pulled into the driveway, Emma came running outside. "Daddy, someone came looking for you today." I smiled. "Who was it?" She shrugged. "I don't know, but he left this." She handed me a small brown envelope. The return address was from a local law office. My heart skipped. Dad had never mentioned a lawyer. That evening, Sarah and I opened the envelope together. Inside was a letter requesting my presence the following Monday. It simply read, "Regarding the estate of Robert Miller," there was one handwritten note at the bottom. "Your father asked that this be given to you personally." Monday arrived faster than I expected. The attorney greeted me warmly. "Your father talked about you often." I smiled sadly. I wish I'd talked to him more. The attorney nodded. He left very clear instructions. Then he placed a small wooden box on the desk. "I've been holding this for nearly 5 years." I looked surprised. 5 years? He prepared everything long before he became ill. Inside the box, there was no money, no expensive jewelry, no property deeds. Only 3 things: an old pocket watch, a faded family photograph, and one sealed envelope. Across the front, Dad had written, "My greatest inheritance." I carefully unfolded the letter. "Dear Jason, if you're reading this, the lawyer has already told you that there isn't much money left. I'm sorry. I spent most of it living, and the rest making sure you had every opportunity I never did. I hope that's enough." I smiled through tears. Dad still thought he needed to apologize, even after everything he'd given me. The letter continued. "When people hear the word inheritance, they think about money, houses, rent, cars. I don't, because none of those things stay forever. Character does. Kindness does. Love does. If I leave you anything, I hope it's those 3 things." I quietly placed the letter on the desk. The attorney smiled. "There's something else." He handed me a small envelope. Inside was a cashier's check. The amount wasn't enormous, but it wasn't small either. Attached was another note from Dad, for Emma's education. I stared at it in disbelief. Even after selling so much, even after giving everything for me, Dad had somehow continued saving. For his granddaughter. The attorney laughed softly. "Your father came in every few months. He added a little more each time. He always said, 'My granddaughter deserves every chance she can get.'" I couldn't hold back the tears. Even after death, Dad was still taking care of us. That evening, I showed Emma the letter. She looked at Grandpa's handwriting for a long time. Then she asked, "So Grandpa was thinking about me, even before he got sick?" "Every single day," I answered. She smiled. "I think Grandpa is still helping us." I nodded. "I think he is too." As I placed everything back into the wooden box, I noticed one final folded paper hidden underneath the lining. It wasn't addressed to me or to Emma. It was simply titled, "Our Family Promise." I slowly unfolded it. What was written there would become the tradition that changed our family forever. I unfolded the final sheet of paper. At the top, Dad had written, "Our Family Promise." There were no long paragraphs, no dramatic farewell, just 5 simple promises. Promise 1, never leave home angry. Life is too short to assume you'll always have tomorrow. Promise 2, eat together whenever you can. Families grow closer, one conversation at a time. Promise 3, never let success become an excuse to neglect the people who love you most. Jobs will replace you. Your family never can. Promise 4, tell people you love them before you think it's necessary. One day, it will be. Promise 5, when life becomes busy, slow down. The people waiting for you at home are the reason you started working so hard in the first place. At the bottom of the page, Dad had added one final sentence. If every generation loves the next one a little better, then my life was worth it. I couldn't hold back my tears. That evening, I gathered Sarah and Emma around the kitchen table. I read every promise aloud. When I finished, no one spoke for a long moment. Finally, Emma looked at me. "Daddy, Can we do what Grandpa asked? I smiled. What do you mean? She pointed at the paper. Let's make these our family rules. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I think your dad would love that. So we did. We framed the letter and hung it in our dining room, not as decoration, but as a daily reminder of the man who quietly built our family with love. Months passed, then years. Life continued. Emma grew older, graduated from high school, then college. The education fund Grandpa had secretly saved helped make her dream possible. On graduation day, Emma carried Grandpa's old pocket watch in her gown pocket. Before walking across the stage, she whispered, "This one's for you, Grandpa." I looked toward the sky, smiled, and somehow, I felt Dad smiling too. One Sunday afternoon, Emma asked if we could visit Grandpa's grave. She placed a small bouquet of wildflowers beside the headstone. Then she pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket. "What is that?" I asked. She smiled. "A letter. To Grandpa." She knelt quietly and began reading aloud. "Dear Grandpa, thank you for loving Dad, so he could learn how to love me. Because of you, our family eats dinner together. Dad never misses my birthdays. He always answers my phone calls. He hugs me every day. You changed our family, even after you were gone." By the time she finished, none of us had dry eyes. As we walked back to the car, I realized something Dad had been trying to teach me all along. The greatest inheritance isn't measured in dollars. It isn't a house, or land, or possessions. The greatest inheritance is the example we leave behind. A life of sacrifice, a heart full of love, and memories that continue changing people long after we're gone. If your parents are still alive, call them today. Visit them. Thank them while they can still hear your voice. Because one day, the only thing you'll wish you had more of is one more conversation